Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Goffstown Zoning Board meeting of February 11th, 2020. And as we get started, I'm going to ask that you silence your phones and please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The Goffstown Zoning Board is an elected board of 5 members and up to 5 alternates. Currently, the board has 5 members and 1 alternate. Is that right? That's right, because you became a regular member. Okay. So if anyone is interested in serving on the ZBA, please see Nancy Larson for more information. The board has a posted agenda for each meeting and tends to follow the items in order. The board will open the public hearing on an application and receive testimony from the applicants, from the abutters and affected parties, and they will ask questions. The public hearing will then be closed, and the board will enter into a deliberative session to discuss the merits of the appeal. Those who do want to make comment will come forward, sit at this table here, and state their name and address for the record. For each application, the board will decide to approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a later meeting. You're welcome to watch the deliberations this evening, or you can contact Nancy Larson at Town Hall to get results. For any motion made, there must be an affirmative vote of at least 3 members. An applicant can request a continuance if there's not a full 5-member board to act on an application. If you are aggrieved by a decision made by the ZBA tonight, you have the right to appeal to Superior Court. However, before appealing to the Superior Court, you must request a rehearing with this board to preserve your right to appeal. Rehearing requests must be filed within 30 days of the decision and state all reasons why the decision was unlawful or unreasonable. Failure to request a rehearing may forfeit your ability to appeal to Superior Court. And with that, I'm going to ask the board to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Nancy.
Nancy Larson, Zoning Code Enforcement Officer.
Leonard Stewart, Vice Chairman.
Gail Lebrecht, Chairman.
Sandra Parker, member.
Denise Langley, member.
John Wilk, alternate.
Thank you. Okay, the first item on our agenda tonight is the approval of minutes to the meeting of January 7th. If we have any corrections or a motion,
A motion to approve the minutes.
A second.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. And I neglected to say that we're going to appoint John as a voting alternate tonight because we are absent one of our regular members. So that does give us a full 5-member board tonight. Okay, the next thing on our agenda is a rehearing request from T.F. Moran, applicant and Lead Development LLC owner, seeking the following variances from the Goffstown zoning ordinances. Variance under section 3.11 Table of Principal Uses to permit construction of a multifamily housing in the commercial district. Variance under section 4.3 Table of Dimensional Regulations to allow construction of 33 multifamily residential dwelling units, whereas 31 units are permitted. And a variance under section 4.3 Table of Dimensional Regulations in section 15.3.5 construction on a lot without street frontage to allow construction on a lot whose only road frontage is a private way, whose sole access to the private way is via a private access easement over an abutting parcel. The property is located off of Mast Road behind 585 Mast Road, Franklin Savings Bank, and is generally referred to as Land Unit 2, Map 18, Lot 60-2, on an approved and recorded consolidation and condominium site plan for Abington Place zoned commercial, and this was continued from January 7th. And they are looking for a continuation again to March, I presume?
March 3rd.
March 3rd.
March 3rd. Does anybody have any comments on that request?
Does that need a vote?
Huh?
Does that need a vote?
Yes.
I motion to grant them the extension to March 3rd.
Second.
Yeah, and then
Sam. I'll defer.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. So that is continued to, and this counts, this continuation, and it counts as notice for the next meeting, so that it will be held here at 7 p.m., 16 Main Street. What else do I need to include in there?
Mildred Stark Room.
Mildred Stark Room, yes, so this would be, this would constitute notice for any abutters or interested parties. Okay, and let's see, we've done that one. And our next application is for Mass Road Crossing LLC, applicant owner, seeking a variance to build an age-restricted 55 and older multifamily development that abuts a residential district. This concerns Section 4.3, Table of Dimensional Regulations, and Section 4.4, multifamily dwellings of the Goffstown zoning ordinance. The vacant property is located on South Mass Road, map 5, lot 60, across from the former Villa Augustina, zoned commercial industrial flex zone. And you're up. Please introduce yourselves for the record.
Good evening, Daniel Muller from Cronin Bisson Zelinski, 722 Chestnut Street, Manchester, on behalf of the applicant, Mass Road Crossing LLC. With me is Jen McCourt, who is the engineer on this project. Just to wave a little bit of background. This board had seen this project early on for a use variance, which was granted. In the process of getting ready to submit to the planning board, an additional count was raised with regard to setbacks, and it specifically with regard to the rear setback, and the rear setback only. And the plan up there basically shows you the buildings at issue. It's 4 duplexes and 2 fourplexes. The design was such that it meets the general setback requirement for the CIFC zone, which is 25 feet. The problem that has arisen are twofold. One, if you look at your ordinance under 403, to the extent that a property abuts a residential zone, the rear setback, or the setback in general, increases to 50 feet. That is one alternative at play here. The other alternative rises under the multifamily provision of your zoning ordinance that basically says that, excuse me, you take the length of the building closest to the relevant lot line, you divide it by half, and that is your setback. Here, the duplexes are approximately, I believe, 54 feet in width. The fourplexes are 108, which gives you 27 and 54 for required setbacks. Obviously, these were originally intended to meet the general 25-foot, and when I say meet, that was the measurement to the stairs off the back of the building. The buildings themselves are a little further back than the stairs, but we've been measuring to the stairs themselves. As you know in the application, I'll start out with sort of the technical argument here that we're not sure that a variance is required, at least in part here. I'll start with the easier one, which is Section 403, the general, what I'll call the alternative 50-foot setback from residential zone. The buildings here behind it are an agricultural zone. Under 2.3 of your zoning ordinance, that zone is specifically and expressly designated as a mixed-use zoning, mixed-use zone, as opposed to a residential zone. It does not provide that the 50-foot applies if residences could be built there. Again, it says specifically a residential zone. Given the plain language of the zoning ordinance, we don't think that that one applies, and that is the 50-foot setback. With respect to the multifamily, one thing I would note that sort of came up as looking at this, under the enabling legislation for zoning, there is a requirement that if you have a class of building, the regulation in terms of setbacks has to be uniform throughout the zoning district. With your multifamily provision, if this was a lot, same zoning district, same use, but was a single duplex, the regular 25-foot would apply. But because of the way you define multifamily to include divisions with, or developments with multiple duplexes, where there's more than one duplex, the setback increases, which I'm not sure is consistent with RSA 674-20, which specifically provides that this is what applies here. Assuming we get by those issues, and I'm going to leave the application to speak to the rest, we'd alternatively ask for a variance. And the basic analysis here is going to be more or less the same with regard to all the elements. Setback requirements are generally put in place to prevent overcrowding, particularly between buildings. And before I get into that, I should mention one more provision in respect to why it's not needed here. Not only is this a 55 plus, but this is a condo development. In note 4, relative to the table of dimensional requirements, for reasons I'll freely admit, could not find the rationale behind this, but the notion is the plain language of the ordinance applies. Note 4 says for condo developments, which is what this will be, there is a 0-yard requirement. If you look up in the definitions in terms of what the concept of a yard is the space between a building and a property line. I think there's some suggestion, or there was some belief that maybe that this was meant to discuss the distance between buildings. I would note that, as we've sort of already discovered in this case, that issue is actually governed by the building code in this state. You have to have a certain separation for fire purposes between buildings. We've actually redesigned this in part because of comments about that very issue. So, right, wrong, or indifferent, and for whatever reason it says 0 yard, plain language applies. But assuming we get to the issue of the variance, again, I think the basic concept with regard to all 5 elements will be sort of the same. Start with the public interest and spirit of the ordinance because they're related. They basically look at whether this unduly conflicts with the basic provisions or the basic purpose of the ordinance at issue. A question that often comes up is, now, we adopt this ordinance, we want to strictly enforce it. That is not a basis for denying a variance. There's a case called Malachi Glen out of Chichester, which basically stands for the proposition you can't deny a variance for the very reason that it was sought in the first place. So the mere fact that this is going to encroach in the setback as defined by 4.3 and 4.4 in terms of the 50 or the half the length of the building, that in of itself is not grounds to deny. A variance is said to unduly conflict the basic purposes of a zoning ordinance only if it alters the essential character of the area or it creates a public health, safety, or welfare issue. Again, the issue here for setbacks generally is an issue of overcrowding. And if we look at the land that would be affected here, we first have the Eversource easement, which is encumbered by utility improvements. You then have a provision owned by, or a strip of land owned by the land, which is the rail trail. And behind that, you have lots that are zoned agricultural, but are owned by the state of New Hampshire. In short, this is, unlike a lot of other lots, this is an area where the chances of any development, where there'll be an issue of overcrowding, are extremely slim. Eversource is not going to be building houses where they have their utility improvements. Presumably, the town has no interest in building houses or other structures where they have the rail trail. And again, beyond that, which leads, that lot, I believe, abuts Glen Lake, you have the state of New Hampshire, which again, is not in the business of building houses. So you're going to have a land behind this that is basically going to remain unimproved. We did go to the planning board in terms of recommendations, and I'm going to at least address some of the concerns, because I wouldn't be surprised if those concerns are raised again, or if you share them. One of them was the view from the rail trail. And if you look at the handout that Ms. McCourt gave you, you can see that before you get to the rail trail, there's that 30-foot Eversource easement. The smallest distance between the rear lot line and the stairs on any of these buildings is going to be 25 feet. So right there, you have 50-plus feet, or approximately 55 feet, before you even get to the rail trail itself. And the rail trail is not right on the boundary here, it's a little further back, so you actually even have a slightly larger boundary as to where the rail trail is itself. In fact, you can see it on the plan, it is marked where it is. So even if you were going to look at other concerns such as aesthetics, and a concern that you'd be looking at a very large building, you're talking, in this case, again, given that the first strip is 30 feet wide, it looks like there's at least another 30 feet on the plan to the closest portion of the rail trail. And that portion actually, which I think looks to be about more or less right in here, is not even going to be developed because this is the wetland area. So you're probably talking 30, and a minimum of 25. So you're talking 85 feet, i.e. the buildings here are not going to be up close and personal. They're going to be a fair distance from the rail trail itself. Given that, and given that you won't have the feeling of overcrowding, it's not going to change the essential character of the area. Also because it doesn't give the feeling of overcrowding and is not going to in fact overcrowd any nearby structures, you're not going to have the public health, safety, and welfare concerns that underlie this particular ordinance. With respect to the diminution of value, again, we are here trying to essentially accommodate a development in terms of a use that was approved by this board. I would note that this plan actually reduces the number of units since this board last saw this particular development. I believe it went down to, 8 units?
50 to 42?
Yep. So, reduce that. Again, you're not overcrowding anything, you're not causing any of the problems on adjacent lots that might arguably diminish the surrounding property values. This is sort of going to be, you're going to see this, and then there is just undeveloped space beyond it. With respect to the hardship issue, the hardship here is the configuration of this lot and the limitations that the lot itself provides. You, on the one end, and this actually is somewhat helpful here, where you have the closest residential zone, and actually the closest residential use between easements and the like, that area is not going to be developed. So that pushes this down. This is a long, skinny lot. You also have the issue that where you basically have a limited area that you can build in. You add to that, you have the brook and the wetlands associated with that. And essentially, to make this workable, even with a reduced number of units, you're going to encroach, if you have the greater setback, you are going to encroach into that greater setback. Again, because you're not giving rise to the overcrowding issue here, notwithstanding that, there's no fair and substantial relationship between the general purposes of the zoning ordinance and their application here. Given those conditions of the property, long skinny lot, with easements and wetlands that sort of limit where you can build, and the use, since it has been approved by this board, would be deemed reasonable, leaving substantial justice as the last remaining thing. Again, where there is not an issue of overcrowding that's caused by the setback violation, public interest, the relevant public interest will be minimal. At the same time, we already have, from the owner's perspective, an effort to reduce this, to make it better fit this property in terms of number of units, and to have this to be a feasible property long-term, you're going to need that small setback encroachment towards the back. Again, we're talking the duplexes and 2 of the fourplexes. And the only other thing I would note, once again, and sort of emphasize, is that we are meeting the general setback of 25 feet, which is the rear setback for this zone. If the board has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but that is essentially the case in a nutshell.
Anybody have questions?
Not at this point.
Where exactly is the residential zone adjacent to your property? It's not clear.
There's a residential zone to the
I mean,
west.
I see the word, but
Right,
That-
it's this property, it's just that property right there.
it's not the one behind it?
No,
What's up above?
the line goes along here, down to the center of the road and back.
There's a use, there's a house, just to be clear. This is zoned agricultural. There is a house, a residential house out here,
Okay, it's still agricultural.
Yes.
but it's still the agricultural zone.
So is the reason we're having this conversation is because the left side of that property is adjoins, or abuts residential?
And an easement.
And I looked at these maps and it wasn't clear to me what was going on, but
And Nancy can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the position that she's taking is the agricultural zone is also a residential zone. So that, because if you look, all of these, in terms of the rear lot line, which is the only one we're talking about right here, which is this, in the rear setback. Because that abuts an agricultural zone, and her position is that this is essentially a residential zone, that the 50-foot one applies. The other one that comes into play here is because this is multifamily, as defined by your zoning ordinance, because it consists of multiple duplexes and a couple fourplexes, which would, even under the general statutory definition, be considered multifamily. You have the additional requirement here that because this is 108 feet, this has to be 54 feet. Same thing here, and these have to be 27, here. They have to be at least 27. This, which one? I think this one is 25 feet. 25 feet to the stairs. So those are why we're here. Because there are alternate definitions of setbacks in your zoning ordinance.
what he said, true, Nancy?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay, I don't believe anybody, so.
Do you want to explain anything further to his explanation of your opinion?
No, I think the, well, there are, I think, probably 2 primary talking points that are I won't say in dispute, but difference in opinion. The one is, as Attorney Mueller mentioned, is my determination that with respect to the setback, the minimum 50-foot setback that's required for the from all property boundaries for the CIFZ district, which this is commercial industrial flex zone, the zoning ordinance requires that if that district abuts a residential district, it doesn't specify which residential district, it just says a residential district, then the 50-foot setback applies. And the multifamily requirement is pretty straightforward. It's based on
This one I have.
on the length of that building that is most parallel to the either the side or rear property boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And then footnote 4
Yeah.
is a real head scratcher. I searched through our files for zoning amendments for several years. It was adopted by the voters in 2005. I looked for discussions of some type in planning board minutes for the workshops and then the public meetings public hearings leading up to the town meeting on the zoning amendments for 2005. And the only hint I found of any thought process involved in presenting this footnote 4, which was added to an already existing footnote for condominium developments, but only in the village commercial district, and it was only when they were of masonry construction and only for the side yard setback. So there was a copy of the proposed zoning amendments in our file from someone had taken some notes. It probably was a planning board member. There was no indication, no initials, no date of when the note was made. But it was just a penciled-in note with actually the first part of that footnote 4. That's the first idea that I can see in our files that this was presented as a possible zoning amendment. Beyond that, it just, it appears in on all the documentation that we have that went to the voters. It appears in the town report consistent with what was presented to the voters, what was made available to the public that year for proposed zoning amendments. So it appears to be consistent that way, just I can't find any rationale for it. And quite honestly, it makes absolutely no sense to me, because as Attorney Mueller was referring to the statute for zoning districts, I would apply a similar thought to this zero setback for condominium developments in any zoning district, and also for any property boundary, any setback, because it's up at the top of the table of dimensional requirements. So it applies, it's a general footnote, it applies to all the zoning districts without restriction. It applies to all front, side, rear yard setbacks without restriction. So why should we allow what boils down to a form of ownership have a zero lot line for the same type of construction that you may have for a rental property? You could have a multifamily. We could consider, I mean, it's not realistic that these would be rental properties. They're mostly duplexes, but you could have, 1, 2, or more buildings with a single owner, rental apartments. They would, of course, have to follow the setback requirements that are specific to the language for multifamily developments. But with respect to the footnote, you would have, two projects seemingly identical, the difference being form of ownership. One project would be in the form of a condominium ownership, the other would be in the form of single-owner rentals. And one project, in theory, could enjoy a 0 setback from, it's not realistic that, because there are other regulations that come into play in the development regulations and fire codes, as Attorney Mueller referred to. But theoretically, one type of project, the condominium project, could enjoy, 0 lot line, where the rental scenario of a seemingly identical project visually, the way it lays out, would have to adhere to the setbacks for multifamily or the underlying setback, whichever is a greater number. So that's one that we need to address next year. It's too late to address it this year. I quite honestly I haven't been able to put any, I just don't understand it. I don't understand the reason behind it, and it doesn't even make sense.
Denise, you had a question?
Actually, she answered it. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? John? Processing.
Well, I'm just thinking in my mind, how can you have a 0 setback? It's just, I mean, how do you
Well,
build, how do you paint the wall on that side if it's not your property? So, I mean, how could it just, it's not pragmatic.
There are projects out there, not necessarily in Goffstown. I'm not sure if there are any in Goffstown, but in other communities, there are zero line developments. They're usually condominiums, and it's
A common
I've
wall?
never for detached condominiums, single family detached condominiums, but it's only for one setback. Usually it's a side setback, and you can't have it so that the parcel next door with another single family home would be 0 lot line next to the house's side next door that has 0 lot. So in other words, it wouldn't become a duplex. You would have, if you're standing on the street looking at 2 houses, for example, or 3 houses, condominium, single family detached condominiums, and say, for example, you would have the left setback being a 0 lot line for this house. The house in the middle would be, the left setback would be 0 lot line, and then the last house on the left would be, left setback would be 0 lot line. So you would have space in between each home, whatever is required per fire codes, but, they wouldn't be attached. It would just become one big building.
Right.
So that's why this footnote doesn't make any sense
Okay.
to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at it and saying 0 yards. Is that to allow that you can put parking?
Well,
Right up to
that's,
the property line and then a building?
no.
That's.
No, I mean, that's the other part of it. As I mentioned, there are other requirements that, you'd have to be able to fit all the required parking spaces. There are landscaping requirements. There are parking lot setbacks from the property boundary. So I suppose you may, in using this footnote, applying it to a project, maybe you can get, one building, one side of one building up against a property line under that footnote, but it's not even realistic that you would be able to have all 4 sides, and who would want that anyways? But it's very non-specific. It just doesn't get into great detail, and
Do we have anything like this in town?
anything,
0 lot line,
not that I'm aware of.
or 0 yards?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
So will we find out, are they gonna discuss why they have to do this and why they can't do anything else?
I would hope so. Balls in your court. You want to discuss why you have to do this and not something, not an amended plan?
I guess my initial response to that, from a legal standpoint, because I've had this discussion actually fairly frequently, in terms of hardship, which is where that concept used to come up, that was the old standard. That's the so-called Gray Rock standard, which is the alternative definition of hardship. The principal definition of hardship, which comes from the Simplex case, basically asks the question, given the specific or special conditions of the property, is what you're proposing reasonable? That's the hardship test under the, as defined in Simplex, as defined in Rancourt versus City of Manchester. It used to be, back in the day, yes, I would have to come in and tell you why I cannot comply strictly with the terms of your zoning ordinance. That was the old test, but that's not the test anymore. So in terms of, again, from a hardship perspective, if you look at Simplex, which was designed to relax the hardship standard because there is a constitutional property right to use your property as you see fit. They relaxed the hardship standard to reflect that, and that's why the question now is whether this would be reasonable given the special conditions of the property. And again, you have a lot here in terms of special conditions. Long, skinny lot. Area in the center, between the brook and the wetlands, you can't develop there. You have easements and the like that are going to impede your ability to build anything on the end, closest oddly to the residentially zoned land. The general purpose of the setback requirement, again, is to prevent overcrowding. And if you look technically what the statute says now, the first element is whether there's a fair and substantial relationship between the general purposes of the zoning ordinance and their specific application to this property. Given that nothing is going to be feasibly built back here, if you allow an encroachment into the setback, it's not going to give rise to an issue of overcrowding. So there is no fair and substantial relationship between the specific purpose of the setback provision and its application to this particular property, given the surrounding uses and ownership, and also given the specific nature of this lot, which sort of limits the building envelope such that if you're going to have, a path in here to drive down, going to satisfy the ability for emergency vehicles to access and things of that nature, these just have to be pushed back a little. You have just small driveways here, and that is the basis for the hardship. Again, from the other statutory requirement is whether the use is reasonable. The use here of multifamily was permitted by this board previously. Once it becomes deemed essentially permitted, the court has indicated, the New Hampshire Supreme Court has indicated that is an indication that the use itself is reasonable. So that's why there's a hardship here. And again, do not have to show that I had no other alternatives. That was the test back during the 80s. Simplex came along in 2001, changed that. That has been the law now for 20 years. It got codified, I want to say 2011, 2013, somewhere in there, such that the Simplex test is now actually in the statute in terms of the definition of hardship. And I guess on the issues that sort of as to whether this is required, again, my basic notion, and given some of the arguments were made, if you're going to basically strictly construe. I'll freely admit, look to see if there's any purpose I could find in the minutes for this 0 yard thing. Couldn't find anything. Look through the annual reports and the like. That being said, ordinances are applied per their plain language, and that says what it says. If the 67420 is going to be used to get rid of that, it would also have to be eliminated with regard to the multifamily, because that does give a rise to a problem in terms of providing a lack of uniformity with regard to duplexes, which are at play here. Again, I think it's, your ordinance speaks for itself in section 2.3 as to the nature of the agricultural zoning district. It says mixed use. Didn't write it, that's what it says, and again, plain language applies. Board has any other questions, I'd be happy to answer.
You guys got questions? Not yet? Okay, I do. Because I'm not thinking about development of that property, because like you said, it may well not be developed. It's kind of unlikely. But you never know down the road. But you're saying that the purpose is, of the setbacks are to prevent overcrowding.
Yep.
And there's only 25 feet to the rail trail, which is already widely used. And even though, you said, that's what you-
Actually, no, there's, the closest building is 25 feet to the Eversource parcel, which is between, the rail trail is up here. This right here, which is where we're talking about, there is a Eversource parcel before you hit the town parcel, and
Okay.
the, so
I miss me reading my own notes.
30 feet is the width, general width of the Eversource parcel. And then the rail trail, if you know, this is 30, I'm just measuring, that's the closest, that's about another 30. So the rail trail is about 60 feet from the rear lot line. So it would be approximately 85 feet from the closest stair, which is one of these 25 feet right here.
That's not
Actually, that's
bad.
not the best one because, but, 26. So here, if you go up to there, it's probably even more than 85 feet, but
To the line of the rail trail, or are you going to the center line or
Thank
to
you.
the other side?
To
this
the
looks
path. To the path of the rail trail.
to the path of the rail
Right
trail,
away.
which is right here,
Right.
and then it turns. So I'll let you do the plan. It's probably easier for you than for me.
Okay, so basically, the way your ordinance reads, it's the part of the structure is the stairs. So that's, the 25 feet is the closest stair, not the building itself. And these are only one-story buildings with basements. They're not, huge monsters or anything. So you have, this is 26, but the closest one is 25, which is over here. You do have a 30-foot wide Eversource piece of land through here, which the poles actually run on the far side of this piece of land. And then the rail trail piece is 99 feet wide. And as Attorney Mullen says, is that it's over 30 feet from the Eversource property line to the actual rail trail itself. So you have at a minimum 85 feet from the stair, not even the building, but from the stair to the rail trail itself. And again, they're only one-story buildings. They're not huge monsters.
How many feet are we to the right-of-way, to the rail trail?
The right-of-way to the rail trail, you'd be at a minimum, probably more, be 55 feet.
It's not very far.
Which, well, 55 feet would be the setback in the multifamily ordinance for the fourplex.
55 would be the setback,
For the
54.
duplex.
54.
54 would be the
The
setback.
multifamily setback for the fourplex. And it's 50, at a minimum, it's 55 feet, and actually that's for this one over here.
So are the property line of the purple line and the Eversource line, are they parallel all the way?
Yes.
And that dimension is 30 feet.
Yes, it is.
And is the rail trail in the middle of the 99 feet, do you know?
No, it's not. It wobbles.
It wobbles.
It wobbles.
Well, I didn't think it was a straight line, that's what.
No, it's not a straight line, and, because it comes away from the lake. And then it goes back.
I guess the question is, how close does it get to the Eversource property? And where? Could it be a butt, line? Because right now, it's pretty parallel to the Eversource line, right?
It's showing about,
Well, is that line true? I mean, is that really where it is?
there are pieces of it that I'm measuring that the surveyor actually measured. And where he measured, it's approximately 45 feet.
So I guess my question should have been, is the rail trail line accurate?
Here it is accurate, and here it is accurate, because that's where the surveyor picked it up for purposes of his survey. The tree line is accurate along here.
Tree line?
The darker green, the darker green.
Oh, the dark
is-
green are the trees. Okay, I remember
Dark-
seeing it out on here, okay.
Yeah, the darker green is on, is.
Oh, so that's the trees. Okay. All right, so if that's accurate, then the rail trail's on the other side of the trees,
Correct.
probably where it show it.
Plus or minus a foot, so it's,
Oh, well, a foot, that's fine. Yeah.
yeah.
Not like it meanders, it comes up to the buildings.
Oh, no,
Okay.
it's a fairly straight line through there.
Okay. And so, the rail trail, so there are trees between the rail trail and the buildings.
Correct.
So the viewing of the buildings from the rail trail, can't see them? Unless there's, leaves are there.
You probably, I mean, you're gonna have to look through the trees, but you'll see them.
Okay, but I
But
mean, it's-
they're not gonna be like in your face, though.
okay, that's what I'm at, okay.
Again, they're only one-story buildings.
Will you be adding additional landscaping in the rear,
In,
along that line?
no, because of the slope, it slopes down right there, so, no.
Oh, so there's a contour line there, so the rail trail is like probably 10 feet or so below the grade of the project?
I don't think it's that far, no.
I see what I think are like topography lines, but I'm not sure. Like here, what are these lines here?
That's actually this is actually the setbacks from Glen Lake for
Oh,
the
these lines?
shoreland.
Oh, okay, those are setback lines, okay.
Those are shoreland protection
Okay.
setback lines.
Thank you. That's like your 50 and 100 feet.
50 feet, 150 feet, and 250 feet.
Okay, got it now.
Ken? You got nothing? Denise?
I don't have any questions, no.
Sandra? John? Do you recall what the planning board's comment was?
They made several comments. If you're referring to the one about how this was going to be difficult to develop, my initial reaction to that is that issue was also settled by the Supreme Court long ago. There's a case called Hill versus Town of Chester. Because there used to be, again, if you went back to the old, very rigid standard for hardship, there was a case called Ryan versus the City of Manchester, which talked about self-created hardships, and that there was a notion that if you bought, understanding that property may be difficult to develop in compliance with the zoning ordinance, that might not qualify for hardship. Hill versus Town of Chester essentially got rid of that position. It basically said that, one, because everyone is presumed, when you buy property, you're presumed to know the land use regulations that apply to it. So if buying with knowledge precluded a variance, no one could get a variance. So they basically said it was a non-dispositive factor in terms of hardship with Hill versus the Town of Chester, and that continues to be the law. It's come up a couple times. I think Carrington versus Town of Warner had that issue arise. But the comment I would make here is, even if we did what was technically permitted in that zone, which would be a mixed-use development, presumably, since the top layer, you'd still be talking about multifamily, we'd still be talking about the same things, and you'd still be talking about a lot that presents the same issues, even if you were doing a permitted development here. So it's sort of inherent in this lot that there are conditions of it that are just going to make it difficult no matter what you do, whether you do a permitted use, whether you do a use allowed by variance, whatever the case is going to be, that's going to be a problem. Because as it stands now, even though we've argued that doesn't apply, you'd also have the thing that even if you were doing a non-residential development there, you still have the 50-foot, which 50-foot setback runs to right here. And you'd still be, generally speaking, because you still, again, these setbacks are met here, where you have a smaller envelope, you'd probably be still talking, once again, because with non-residential, you're talking about usually more parking. Undoubtedly, with non-residential, you're also talking landscaping and things of that nature to make it blend in. So you're probably going to the same place, and we're still here before you, whether we're doing a permitted use or a use allowed by variance. So from my perspective, I heard those comments. To me, that issue was decided, Hill versus Town of Chester, I think was 2001 as well, same year Simplex.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, because I'm going to just summarize from my memory. They did take a vote, and it was a very close vote, but it failed. That they were going to say that it doesn't interfere with their planning objectives. And there were the concerns that you expressed.
Yep.
And then they just ended it as leaving, basically, that they had no comment.
Correct, because I think, if I remember correctly, Mr. Devanza in particular had an issue with sort of the way, at least I interpreted, ruling on issues that are for this board as opposed to the planning board. And he thinks that issues for this board should be ruled on by this board, and issues for the planning board should be ruled on by the planning board. So I think, because I remember he was one of the people who did not support the motion, and my memory was that was sort of his commentary after the fact.
Yeah, they had no, after that motion, they had a little bit of discussion, but there was no alternate motion
Correct.
or any type of comment.
Is this one of the incidences that's going to the planning board prior to coming to us and we
It
wait for
did.
comments?
It did.
So I would just like to ask the planning board if they're requesting that, to give us a comment or have it formalized. And if they have no comments, then write that so that we know formally.
It
How they
was, I
feel.
think, my recollection is they did this, when this application came to the zoning board the first time, correct? For the use variance? We don't have anything in file.
They met, they went to the planning
Yeah.
board in between.
I know, I recently prepared a zoning review for the planning board hearing, but, we don't have a copy of.
Because I put it in the minutes, it was a meeting just a couple weeks ago.
Yes, it was a couple weeks ago. I can, you are exactly correct. There was a lot of discussion. There were some people who were ready to seemed to say yes, others were more hesitant. There was a motion to essentially say it didn't implicate planning concerns. That motion failed. And then there was additional discussion, and as I indicated, I believe Mr. Devanza, at least, again, my interpretation of his comments was, he didn't want to vote on that because he didn't think it was his issue. I do believe that Joanne Duffy did something in writing. And there should be somewhere in your packet, I'm just looking at an electronic copy, a memo dated January 27th, 2020, from Joanne Duffy, Planning and Economic Development Director, Reason Mass Road Crossings, LLC, Planning Board comments. And I'll read it, just so it's in the record. The planning board reviewed the variance request for the 50-foot setback requirements for multifamily abutting a residential district and offers the following comment. Motion was made that the planning board does not see this as a planning issue or being detrimental to the project. Vote 3 in favor, 4 opposed. Motion failed. The board comments are as follows. A motion was made to find that there was no planning board issues. However, the motion failed. There are no further comments.
I don't have that in my,
No, I don't either.
we don't have that.
But that's what we needed. Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we are not bound by their comments either.
Oh, I understand that, but I'm just saying if, by the code, that we have to allow them 30 days and we can't make a decision, and we've turned people away because we couldn't vote, I'll make sure we're doing what we are obligated to do.
Okay, any further questions?
Yes, I'm new to all this, I wasn't here when this happened back in the summer. What exactly was the motion that they voted down?
I don't have the minutes in front of me to be able to tell you. I don't have
mean-
my,
Would you like me to read it again?
the motion.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you have access to the minutes.
this is at least how it's written in the,
And Joanne's.
and
Summary.
Miss Duffy's,
Summary?
yeah, as I said, there was something. The motion was made that the planning board does not see this as a planning issue or being detrimental to the project. Vote 3 in favor, 4 opposed, motion failed. And there was no further motion. There was some additional discussion. Some people expressed why they sort of voted the way they did, but there was no further motion, so there were no further comments, and they left it at that.
Yeah.
So when you say failed, the motion was made that this wasn't their issue and that failed, or?
Well, I think they disagree.
The double negative thing, I think, for
Right.
me.
Yeah, well, I think
Yeah, well.
people interpreted this, again, I'm just gonna give you my interpretation. I think certain people saw that as, even though it said, this was not a planning issue, some people still saw it as something that was for this board as opposed to the other board.
Right.
And at least one of the people who voted in the negative sort of suggested that.
Those that voted in favor of the motion, a lot of their comments were kind of like, what's it gonna harm?
Well, they made a motion that this isn't our deal, so we don't care.
Right, exactly. It's our,
So
it's
they've
we own
advocated
this.
it back to us.
Right.
Is that what-
Mhm.
Okay.
23rd?
Essentially, they have no comment.
Yeah, essentially, that's how it ended up. They had no comment.
comment.
Okay. All right. Any other comments here? I'm going to open it to the public.
Well, one comment too, in thinking that, if one of the arguments here is the reason these setbacks are being applied, because we're considering the agricultural zone as a type of residential zone, I don't think that's correct, because I can recall a case before this board, 2-3 years ago possibly, where we had some activities going on in an agricultural zone that was fully residentially developed, and I believe my recollection of the decision in that case was that it's agricultural, what's allowed in agricultural is agricultural regardless of the fact whether you've built houses there or not. If I'm-
Are you referring to?
The truck parking
the truck-
case.
That was an issue that had to do with the zoning ordinance. The language that was actually approved by the voters specifically referred to the R1 and R2 residential districts. That language never made it into the final ordinance. It just referred to agricultural district. So the issue with that one and why the board ended up just dispensing with that application was because the zoning ordinance did not properly refer to the language that was adopted by the voters, which specified in that section, it actually specified the R1 and R2 residential districts.
Okay, so not entirely pertinent.
Not entirely.
But I still question it. I'm not sure that I agree that because it has a residential use or potential for residential use that it would apply, because the definition for the agricultural district is entirely different from that of the residential district. So I'm not. So what you're saying, your opinion is that it's any district that has residential use in it?
No, it would, I would consider the residential districts in town to be agricultural, residential 1, and residential 2. Those are the, if you look at, using an argument that the agricultural district is not a residential district because it's defined in our zoning ordinance as a district of multi-uses, and every district is a district of multi-uses. And so the agricultural district was created to allow for different agricultural uses, as well as residential lots of larger sizes. And the residential 1 district and residential 2 district are a higher density residential district. And if you look at the table of uses in the zoning ordinance, you'll see under principal uses that there are even some non-residential uses that are permitted in the agricultural district. And many of the uses that are permitted in the residential 1 and residential 2 districts are permitted in the agricultural district, not all, of course, and then there are some that are permitted by a conditional use permit. In some districts, 1 or 2 of those 3 districts that I reference, and maybe in another, either an outright permitted use or maybe by special exception. So I don't know if this has ever been decided by the zoning board. And so if the board feels that the agricultural district should not be considered residential for purposes of setbacks and any other location in the zoning ordinance that refers to residential district, that does not include agricultural district. Just, that's your job, one of your jobs tonight. So if the board feels that is the case, that is the intent of the agricultural district, that is not to be viewed as a residential district, then I'll just know going forward, and I'll, make that noted. Maybe in the future we can make it a little clearer in the zoning ordinance.
Well, the agricultural district does have different setbacks than what the residential has.
Mm-hmm.
They are different.
So I'm looking at agricultural setback, it's 30 feet. We're talking about 50.
So, may I comment?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I have comments, I have questions. So I'm going where it says if it's abutting a residential, it doesn't say on what line. So, I don't have an issue with the residential because we granted the variance, I don't have a problem. What I have a problem with is 16 units are infringing to me on our setbacks. That's a lot. This isn't one or two buildings. That's a lot of what you're putting onto this lot is going into the buffer of setback, and I have a real issue with that. I don't see how that is a hardship or a requirement. It's that much. There's a couple of buildings, but that's a lot. You're putting almost a wall of buildings into the setback. That's just a comment I have.
Can I respond?
Sure.
That sort of argument is problematic in several respects. There is case law going back that if you essentially, because under that logic, you're only allowed to have what they call slight variances. And the Supreme Court, I believe back in the 1970s, when at times these things were a little stricter, even back then said, adding that sort of gloss to the statute is improper. Because essentially, there's nothing in the statute that says you can only do slight setback, or slight variances, large variances. It just says variances. And in terms of, again, you have to look at the specifics of the case. With the Eversource property, the rail trail, and DOT property behind these specific buildings. And again, setbacks are there to designed. They serve a particular purpose. And one of the things that you cannot do is say, well, I don't like the fact that you're violating and therefore I'm not going to give you the variance. That's the Malachi Glen case that they said, again, if that's the standard, nobody can get a variance. So you have to look, is this going to create overcrowding, which is what the setbacks are designed to prevent? There is nothing back there. DOT, they're not going to be building residences or anything else. In all likelihood, Eversource already has its power lines there. They're not going to be building things that are going to crowd the buildings. You have the tree line, you have the rail trail that's beyond that. From a practical perspective, even if you apply the most rigid of the, or the most expansive of the setbacks here, which is for the fourplex, which would be 54 feet, that rail trail, which is basically going to be the closest thing, would meet, from a practical perspective, that's going to be more than the 54 feet from that building. So in terms of like essentially undeveloped space between the two, it's going to look the same. And again, the test is, given the conditions, is that reasonable? And I understand, I get the notion that people think that because, you've adopted standards and you like those applied. But now there's also the notion that there are property rights and that this is how this test has come about. It balances the two. And that's how they've determined to balance it. That's what's in the statute. It's not something I've written. This is what the legislature has written, is said, this is now the rule. So I think if you were talking about a situation where you had a house here, you may have more of a point. Because now you're having an issue, there's a building, there's another big building right here, even though it's only one story. This may be two, these are gonna be one. There's more of a colorable argument, but where there's gonna be nothing back here, you're just gonna see these buildings and nothing else, you don't have the overcrowding issue.
And what is the closest spot again to the rail trail lot line? Right away.
The rail trail right away,
Mm-hmm.
that would be this fourplex here at 25 feet and this duplex at 25 feet. And that's to the, actually, it's this.
That's
That's
the
the
Eversource.
That's the
PSNA, that's the
Eversource.
Eversource.
Oh.
Yeah, I want to the right of way of the rail trail.
Well, it'd be the same, so you'd have the 30 feet, so it'd be 55 feet.
Okay.
And this is to the building there, that building corner right there would be the closest building corner to the rail trail. Sorry.
Anybody else have questions? We are gonna, if you're all, are you all set for the moment? I'm gonna open it up to the public. All right, I'm going to open this hearing to the public. Is there anybody there that would like to comment on this application? Come forward, state your name.
Good evening, my name is Norris Fiviers. My address is 1361 Elm Street, Manchester. My only comment is with the public service piece, we did make an effort to acquire that. And some of the people wanted to, there was one dissenting vote on that, so if there's one, they won't sell it. Had we been fortunate enough to get that, then we wouldn't be here. But unfortunately, the piece being there still does seem to serve as a setback to the rail trail and any concerns of crowding. That's all I've got to
Thank you.
say. Thank you.
Anybody else? Nobody? Okay, public hearing is closed. Do you have any, where'd you go? Do you have any further comments that you want to add before we begin our deliberation?
No, I think at this point, made the case, unless the board has questions.
Last chance? Okay. then the
Thank you.
The public hearing will be closed, and the board's going to enter deliberations. Comments, anybody? I can see you're thinking. John?
I don't know the property in that area that well, but if it's a technicality, that's one thing. But if in fact that whole space is open down to Glen Lake and will never be developed, Eversource is probably never gonna give that up. And there's a lot of greenery here, so there is something, I mean, I don't know this, I mean, I drive by it all the time, but I never, I drove by it today, I took a look, but I wasn't thinking about the trees, but there are trees back there. and-
Yeah, but how much of those trees are gonna be removed for the construction into
And
that
there's gonna
zone?
be
Well,
no
I would say
landscaping
they're
on the back.
outboard of their property line, so none.
Huh?
The trees are outboard of the property line. The purple line is the property line, and all that green is on the other, between that and the rail trail, right?
I think there's more open space than.
Most of it, and the trees that are within the buffer, the 100-foot buffer, can't be removed unless they have approvals from either zoning board or planning board.
So which line is the 100-foot buffer?
You see the orange on the other side of the green?
Oh, this one, oh, I thought that was the 50-foot setback number. Okay. I mean, I looked at the legend in the original package, and it didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, the
lines
orange,
weren't-
Colors help.
this,
Pardon me?
this,
The colors are helping.
Oh, the colors are helping, but the lines, they indicated what it was supposed to be, but it didn't make sense that that's what it was.
these two orange lines only apply to the buffer.
The two that, along the wetlands
The-
area.
Right. There's a little stream that goes
Okay, right.
through the center.
So these houses are broken up by that wetland area to boot.
And
That's
I
the
also,
area they're
I'm
seeking
pretty
a variance on.
familiar with that area. I've walked the rail trail in that area more times than I can count. And I have trouble having any issue with it because quite realistically, nothing's going to happen there that I can see. You're dealing with, basically, once you get past the rail trail, you've got a nice long slope down to the waters of Glen Lake, so realistically, I can't see a problem with it myself.
Denise?
I'm more concerned about the rail trail.
Mhm.
However, they have 55 feet to the rail trail. If you follow the most stringent buffer, it's 54. I agree that Eversource's property is not going to be utilized for anything. I struggle with how many buildings that we're giving a variance. Because I think it does have a lot to do with how we make our decisions. It's not how many buildings, just how many square feet.
Mhm. It's taking up a lot of
into
that space.
Sticking it. However, I mean, I keep kind of going back to, is it really hurting anything?
Like you, I have a concern about the rail trail. And, you know, the idea is to prevent overcrowding. And the rail trail is still used by so many people. And we don't, you know, it may not be a residence or a business that this would be getting closer to, but the rail trail is something that is used significantly. And to be putting buildings too close is, one, it's going to influence the users of the rail trail, and also the buyers of the property as well. They're going to have stairs to go out back, but people want to put on a deck. Are they going to be allowed to do that?
Oh, wait a minute, it's the condominium.
It is, but, I mean, people may try to put on decks or something like that.
Well, but presumably they'd have to come
They'd-
for a variance
They'd
if
have
they
to come
tried
for
to
a
do
variance,
that.
but there's, you know, there's other things that property owners want to do to their property, and they're not going to have the space to do it, and are they going to try to do it anyway?
If they were an inch into that buffer going into the rail trail, I'd have an issue. But they're not. This is not easy for me to admit. It's not.
Plus the
But,
rail
I mean,
trail-
I've got to be fair, and they meet the setback to the rail trail. And that is more
Yeah,
important
they
to
said
me,
55 feet,
because the
right?
other property is not going to be utilized. I mean, it's
There's
it's
parts of that
not.
rail trail that go along commercial property on Mass Road. I mean, it's not,
Well, or,
But
Yeah,
it's not infringing in the
I
rail
agree
trail,
with
so
that.
I don't have an issue. If it was, I'd have an issue.
and at how many other spots along the rail trail is it built up to within 10 or 15 feet of the back of existing houses? I can think
exactly.
Yeah.
of several spots there.
But that's
that
because
close.
the rail trail came in after
Right.
Right.
people's property.
But it's not gonna stop
Um,
people from using it, because all of a sudden we will.
Well,
have
it's a
an eyesore
non-issue
like that.
in this case to me.
I think so.
If it, like I said, if it infringed, I'd have a real issue with it.
I mean, I always ask myself, how will I explain that I decided to do this or not? And I think the justification that they have a minimum of 55 feet to the rail trail property line, or property lines, actually. That, you know, even the 108-foot building, or 104-foot, 108-foot building, half of that is 54, it still works.
Right,
Almost like they
exactly.
did it on purpose. Anyway,
Make the buildings longer.
but, it is a skinny lot.
It is a difficult lot.
It's hard.
It is. And I do know that the fact that they knew about the difficulties of the lot beforehand really is kind of a mood issue, according to
Well.
case law. Statute.
So, as I understand, this is the condo, so these are gonna be sold to people, as opposed to managed as an apartment?
Yeah, they're gonna be sold as condominiums, individually owned, but they will have an association, and then they will have like a management company or some sort of maintenance agreement. You know, they'll have the maintenance agreement for the property upkeep, I'm sure. They'll have maintenance agreements for any drainage issues or
Just to be clear, that it
drainage.
is a condominium, not an apartment.
Right.
And also, we got an extra 5-foot buffer out of those stairs, because it's really 25 to the stairs, and it's probably 30 to the buildings. So, I mean, still
We,
what it's-
there's no law against a condominium being owned by a couple people, could own all of them, couldn't they, and rent them out?
Yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. You said they're not gonna be rentals, they're gonna be condominiums,
Right,
but
well,
they could
rentals
be.
as far as
Okay,
the
I'm just-
intent,
Okay.
the intent or the title of the ownership.
So we don't have to deal with the 0-yard thing.
Well, the
Right.
board needs to rule on that as well. There are three things the board needs to rule on.
So if we rule in one, does that make the other moot?
Mm-mm.
Crap.
So there's one having to do with my determination that the 50-foot setback for the commercial industrial flex zone applies, which would effectively be the underlying zoning district setback. And the other is the variance requests under the multifamily section of the zoning ordinance, which states that you take the length of the building that is closest or most parallel to the property boundary divided by 2, and then you take the greatest of the number, either the underlying setback, which the board will need to rule, is at 50 feet, or is it the rear yard setback, the base setback for the commercial industrial flex zone, which for the rear is 25 feet. And so the multifamily section in the zoning ordinance for setbacks says that you take the greater of the two setbacks, either the underlying setback or the setback that you get when you do the
Measurements.
division. And then lastly is footnote 4.
The 0 foot,
0 yards.
0 yards.
For a condominium development.
So you're asking for a motion, if we were going to continue on with a variance or consider talking about the variance, we need to determine that footnote 4 does not come into play on this.
Right, and then secondly, really determine what is the underlying setback that you need to compare for the multifamily development. So is it the 50-foot from a residential district for the CIFC, or is it, in this case, 25 feet, which is just the normal, I say, everyday rear yard setback for the commercial industrial flex zone?
Okay.
Not factoring in any zoning district that's
Okay.
around it.
So just to get this started here, bear with me, I'll make a motion. Somebody else isn't ready. Okay, I'd like to make a motion that table 4.3 footnote 4 does not pertain to this. Which shows a 0 yard as part of a condominium project or 0 side yard in the VC district with masonry construction.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have the motion about note 4. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No, multi-dis.
Motion carries. Were you a yes? That motion carries.
No, we're on to the multifamily, the 4.4.13.
4.4.13.
For the setbacks.
Is it 4.4.13?
I think it is
4.4.3.
0.3, okay.
They were written backwards in the
Oh.
variance
Variance
request.
request.
So now we have to figure out whether we want to go with what would be the larger setback.
Oh, yes, you're right. It was 4.4.13. I was just looking down the paragraph below it. I see it. The side and rear minimum setbacks for multifamily structures shall be greater of the underlying setback for that zone, or the length of the building side most parallel to that lot line divided by 2.
Which would have been the largest of their construction, which they said it was 108, which would make it 54 feet.
Mhm.
I believe that should be our required setback.
Okay, you wanna make a motion?
All right, I make a motion that the 4.4.1.3 multifamily setback be used as the largest, which is the 108 that they stated, which would be 54 setback required.
I'll second that.
So 108 and 54 feet required. Okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. And lastly, we have, let's see,
Who seconded?
I did.
Denise. Okay, 4 point. Okay, what's the last one?
No, it's
Really,
main
4.3. Because that's where you really need to decide whether or not the 50-foot setback in the CIFC zone applies, because if you take half the length of 2 of the duplexes, which number 3 and 4 appear to be 72 feet in length, is that correct? Okay. So, if you divide that number by 2, you end up with 36 feet. So now you need to determine whether that CIFC 50-foot setback,
Where it's abutting a residential zoning district.
right, does that apply to an agricultural district? And then you can easily make the, motion for the building 3, 4, 12, and 13.
I think it would.
You think it applies?
I do.
Even though this is for a residential zoning district, not an agricultural zoning
Yeah,
district?
but the agricultural is a multi-use.
Right.
So,
It does allow, but it's not named residential.
no, it's not.
Agricultural is agricultural, residential is residential. And where this specifically says residential zoning district.
Well, we made it this property is a residential district now because we took it out of the flex zone.
No,
let
it's
them
still,
have that.
no, it doesn't change its zoning.
Well, we gave them the ability to have the variance
We
to make
did.
it residential.
We gave them right. But we've got to determine whether or not the 50 feet applies for where it's abutting
And-
abutting a residential zoning district.
Think of it in terms of district, not use.
Right.
And I'm still with the agricultural, where we do have that flexibility in there as it having a future use. Am I correct in that aspect, that this could be used in the future as a residential area? Or are we just gonna broad spectrum that it's just agriculture, it's not big enough, so probably maybe nobody would buy it and nobody would build?
Well,
No.
go ahead.
I think both of those things kind of apply. Yes, they're claiming that because of the Eversource and Rail Trail, that it's not going to be built up. But my concern is that I don't think we should say that an agricultural zone is a residential zoning district. I don't think they're synonymous.
No, I don't think they're synonymous. I think it's a possibility under the guidelines that we have. And if it's something that could be put to use, is that something we need to be considerate of? Should we, because at this point in time, they only missed by one vote to sell this Eversource piece of land.
Right.
That doesn't mean that in the future that won't be sold, and maybe then this whole thing would come into play.
Right.
So I'm just giving the what if on this one. Are we doing our due diligence by just saying, oh, well, there's probably not a possibility? You know,
No,
should we
no.
go in that aspect?
I mean, I just think we've got to also look at the real-life conditions on the ground, too. Arguing the district is one thing, and in a different kind of parcel where there was room and actual possibilities of development, I'd be more inclined, but I don't, I think you've got to take into account the real conditions of that particular parcel that you're dealing with.
It seems to me, if they wanted to say agriculture, they would have said residential and agriculture.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of a literal
doesn't
reading
make-
on this. It says residential zoning district.
Words are the words. I don't think it includes agriculture.
Right,
And
and when you
and-
look in the definitions, there's a separate definition
Right.
for residential, separate definition for agricultural, and so,
And with the case that I mentioned before, we went through some of those same kind of arguments as far as, is agricultural a residential district because you can put a house in it or not? So I think it's, I think we don't need to expand that definition, basically.
we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay,
I move that the variances requested for buildings 3, 4, 12, and 13 in the application be granted as requested.
three, 4, 13, 12, 13, 3 and 4?
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about that. So then are we implying that it needs to be 50 feet setback?
He's
I thought we
asking-
just decided that it didn't need to be.
you were giving them the variance, right? You're granting the
Yeah,
variance?
granting.
He's granting the variance, meaning that they don't have to comply with the setback in those
Oh, well,
four.
okay, I guess
We're reading it
27
that
feet
they
is
need
still
it.
needs a
Yeah.
variance.
Correct.
Okay, so.
But there were,
We,
I'll
Still need to directly rule on whether the 50-foot, I would feel more comfortable if we just had a vote on whether the agricultural district should be considered a residential district when the zoning ordinance is making reference to a residential district, like in this case with the CIFZ and the 50-foot minimum setback requirement.
I'll make a motion for that.
Thank you.
I think that we need to, it's a residential property. It's not saying what, if it's the rear or the side or the front. It abuts a residential property.
What's not saying?
It's saying if the CFIZ zone abuts a residential zone, then it has to have a 50-foot setback.
Actually, is this the zoning map
See-
here?
And it butts it on the left side.
Correct.
Oh, no,
It has nothing to do with the agriculture.
So what is your motion?
I guess if you want somebody to read, we have to go by it's abutting a residential piece of property.
I'm not following the.
It already abuts on the left side, a residential easement. Don't
Right,
they
so
have on that?
why are we concerned about the agricultural side?
Because that's where the setback encroachments
yeah,
are.
that side is fine. I'm just thinking, I live in the north part of town, and I think a lot of it's agricultural, and there's a lot of homes.
it abuts a small portion of residential property. The larger portion is zoned agricultural, but agricultural is used for residential, which is what the concern is, that it's 50 feet, we're abutting residential. So is the residential zoning district strictly something that's zoned residential? Or is it something such as agricultural or other districts that allow residential development?
Doesn't the default go with,
The pre-existing.
no, the dimensions of the building, 14413?
Yeah, it does. It was the one.
Isn't that what we're gonna ultimately
Still-
determine our
We have to determine.
our
where
decision on?
That lies.
Doesn't matter,
It matters.
it does matter, even though
Whether
that
you're
number
ta-
would be greater than any setback?
Yes, because I need to know moving
For
forward.
future applications?
Well, I think that's a case by case, depending
No,
on
It
what's.
can't, it can't be.
No, you can't change it for one and not for another.
An agricultural lot's an agricultural lot.
That's my
Yeah.
my
That's my
thoughts.
feeling
can,
on that.
can I offer an alternate motion?
Sure.
That for purposes of the setbacks, that abutting an agricultural zone shall not be considered a residential zone for the purpose of determining setbacks from in the CIFZ.
Well put. Second.
And Denise. Okay. All in favor? Does everybody understand what the motion is? Because we've gone back and forth.
So can you state that again? Is this for multifamily use?
Well, just for purposes of determining the setbacks in the CIFZ, that the agricultural zone shall not be considered the same as a residential zone.
Just have a question. What if there are already homes built on that?
Grandfathered.
Their grandfather.
Or grandfathered.
We can't make them undo it.
That
No, I
doesn't
mean,
make it
what-
residential.
What if there are homes on the agricultural side?
That doesn't make it a residential zone.
It's not a residential zone.
Okay, so,
There's a difference between, uses and zones. And this says zoning district. So that's my concern, my argument. It says zoning district.
Right.
So it's the residential zoning district. The agricultural zoning district is different from the residential district.
even though it has houses?
Even though they still have residences in it, a residential use
Okay.
within it, it's not zoned residential. I'm taking it literally. Residentially zoned district.
Yeah.
I was thinking, so people with a 2-acre lot somebody could build 25 feet from that now. Is that true? With this motion?
No.
Not changing the zoning, we're just saying an agricultural zone is an agricultural zone and not to be confused with a residential just because there's a house on it.
When you have an agricultural, you are able to build a house on it, but that doesn't mean that it becomes a residential. It's still an
The
agricultural
use
with the
doesn't
property.
change the district.
So the CIFZ zone, which this is, says you need a 25-foot rear setback.
When abutting a residential zone.
No.
No.
It says you need 25 feet setback. You need 50 if you abut a residential. I'm just wondering if we're setting a precedent that somebody could come build a house 25 feet off someone else's house instead of,
Can you repeat what you just said?
maybe I'm overcomplicating it, but right now, a CFIZ zone, you need a 25-foot setback. I suppose it doesn't matter, because if you're agricultural on both lands, you need whatever you need, 30 feet, I think. Okay, I withdraw my stupidity.
It is confusing.
Well,
I'm not gonna say it's not, but
You
the
guys
end
are
of
the
the
experts, I'm
day,
trying to catch up.
we're going with this. Let me make sure I got this one number.
Okay, so residential is residential and it's not
And
agricultural.
agricultural is agricultural.
If you state that motion again, I'll second it.
That the
Maybe.
agricultural zone, wait a minute, it's already been seconded.
Oh,
Then you second
we're
it.
done. I'm done.
That's okay,
All right,
that's
all
okay,
right.
it's confusing.
We done with conversation? Ready for a vote? All in favor?
I,
Motion carries. Okay, and we never actually voted on your motion to grant the,
I don't think there was a second for it, was there?
no,
No.
okay, so we'll go back to Len's motion to grant the variances as requested.
On buildings 3, 4, 12, and 13.
What about the other buildings?
That was already done.
Okay. 3, 4, 12, and 13. Okay. We have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
I,
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, do we have any other business?
I can come sit down now.
Welcome, Alan.
Hi,
Yes.
Good to see you.
I'm glad to be here.
Wish you'd have been 10 minutes earlier.
I might be able to straighten that out. I'm sitting here listening, I'm saying, okay, they'll figure it out eventually.
Okay, do we have any other details?
No. That's it. Time to go home.
Do we,
motion to adjourn.
I'll second. We're done. 5-0-0.
Off.
We are done.
Okay.